London was burning. Not the London of glass towers and red buses, but a Roman outpost, arrogant and golden. Flames clawed the sky. Bodies choked the streets. Screams echoed between crumbling villas and shattered temples. And through it all, she rode, her red hair wild in the wind. Her eyes, not mad, not afraid. Focused. Furious. This wasn't savagery. This wasn't chaos. It was justice. They had whipped her. They had raped her daughters. They thought she'd weep. She set their empire on fire. And as the city crumbled beneath her feet, she whispered something that would never be written in Roman history books. Let them know a mother lit this blaze. When Rome entered Britain, it didn't shout. It whispered. Not with legions, not at first, but with parchment, titles, flattery, and gifts dipped in poison. They said, "Let us protect you." And so, the Iceni tribe, proud, fierce, and free, became clients. Not conquered, but not free. King Prasutagus, ruler of the Iceni, saw the game. He understood Rome didn't need to draw swords to draw borders. They came in red cloaks and golden coins. Promised roads. Promised trade. Promised peace. But every treaty had a trap. Every handshake left a stain. Roman money flowed in, and so did Roman taxes. Their engineers built roads to move troops. Their language filled scrolls and erased histories. And their gods demanded temples, carved atop the sacred groves of the Druids. The Iceni chieftains wore Roman brooches now, drank Roman wine, sent their sons to learn Latin. But it wasn't love. It was survival. Behind the smiles of Roman governors stood entire legions. Armored, disciplined, ruthless. They didn't need to conquer. They could wait. Rome had a quiet way of breaking you. First, they make you depend on them. Then, they remind you it was never a partnership. It was ownership. And Prasutagus? He tried to keep the balance. One foot in honor, the other in submission. He wrote in his will, "Let Rome inherit half my kingdom. Let my daughters rule the rest." He thought that was peace. But Rome didn't honor wills. Rome didn't share. Rome waited for kings to die. Then it came for the crown. He was not a warlord. He was not a tyrant. Prasutagus, king of the Iceni, ruled with caution and quiet pride. He had seen what Rome did to those who roared too loud. So he chose diplomacy over defiance. But beside him stood a different fire. Boudica. Not just queen by title, but by blood, by battle, by birthright. She was tall, fierce, with a voice that could silence a council and a gaze that could shame a soldier. Where Prasutagus played Rome's game, Boudica watched and remembered. She didn't trust the coins. Didn't trust the smiles. She saw Rome's gifts for what they were, bribes dipped in blood. And yet, they ruled together. Balanced. He was the hand extended. She was the blade tucked behind the throne. Together, they raised two daughters. Not as pampered princesses, but as future warriors. They were taught to ride before they could read. To aim a spear before they learned to write. 4 years, the kingdom held. The Iceni remained on their land. The people whispered that perhaps this was the future. A fragile peace between the eagle and the wolf. But fragile things break. When Prasutagus fell ill, the Romans did not wait for mourning. His body was barely cold when their messengers arrived. They laughed at his will. A woman cannot rule. A daughter cannot inherit. His lands were seized, his palace ransacked. And to remind the Iceni who ruled Britain now, they came for the queen, not with honor, but with rope. Rome didn't kill Prasutagus, but they ensured his death shattered the very world he tried to protect. And in that silence, a fire began to rise. The Roman soldiers didn't come with scrolls this time. They came with ropes. Boudica stood at her gate, head held high. She wasn't hiding. She wasn't begging. This land is ours, she told them. You have no claim. The centurion laughed. You are not a king. You are not even a man. They dragged her into the street. Her daughters cried out. Young, brave, terrified. The Roman punishment was not execution. That would have been mercy. They beat her, lashed her body with iron-tipped whips, tore her skin open. Each strike wasn't just pain. It was a message. This is what we do to queens. But it didn't stop there. Her daughters, they were dragged away, held down. And what was done to them was not just a crime. It was an annihilation of girlhood, of dignity, of hope. The soldiers laughed. The villagers were forced to watch. Rome wanted the memory of this moment to spread like rot. Boudica lay in the dirt, bleeding, broken. And still, she did not scream. She looked to the sky, to her gods, and she made a vow. I will not weep for this. I will make the empire weep instead. That day, something in her died, and something far more dangerous was born. She disappeared. After the whipping, after the shame, after the blood, Boudica vanished into the woods. Rome believed she'd been broken, that the queen had crawled into the shadows to die. But they didn't know what grows in silence, or what answers the call of rage. In the forests of Britannia, she found the old gods, the ones Rome tried to erase. She knelt not as royalty, but as fury wrapped in flesh. And the druids came, bearded, painted, humming chants older than stone. They knew her pain. They felt the blood in the soil. And they anointed her blade with ash, with wine, with prophecy. You will not be remembered as a woman, they told her. You will be remembered as a storm. Word spread like smoke, not just among the Iceni, but across every tribe Rome had humiliated. The Trinovantes, the Cornavi, the warriors of the marsh and more. Farmers picked up rusted swords. Mothers wrapped stones in cloth. Sons painted their faces with vengeance. Boudica didn't raise an army. She awoke one. And it was no army of discipline and drills. It was wolves. Wolves with grief in their hearts and fire on their breath. Her daughters stood beside her, silent but unbroken. She looked at them not as victims, but as witnesses. We are not marching for gold, she told the warriors. We are marching for graves, for memory, for revenge. And so the forest emptied, toward the cities, toward the roads, toward Rome's proudest outposts. The flame had been lit. Now, the empire would burn. Camulodunum, a Roman jewel in Britannia. Wide stone roads, marble forums, statues of the emperor towering over native homes. They called it a colonia, a colony for retired Roman soldiers. But to the Britons, it was an insult carved into the land. It stood atop sacred ground, built with slave labor, guarded not by legions, but arrogance. When the people of Camulodunum heard rumors of revolt, they laughed. A woman leads them. They are savages with sticks and stones. They fortified the temple to Claudius, a monstrous symbol of Roman conquest. But it wasn't a fortress. It was a tomb. Boudica's army didn't march. It surged. Thousands of warriors, painted in blue, screaming war songs lost to history. They didn't ask for surrender. They didn't wait for dawn. They descended like thunder. The Roman colonists ran to their homes. But the doors didn't stop the flames. The temple priests prayed to Caesar. But no God answered. The statues crumbled. The streets choked with fire and smoke. The proud walls cracked under the fury of the forgotten. For 2 days, the city burned. No survivors. No mercy. Not even the women and children. Because the Britons remembered their own. The mothers whipped. The daughters raped. The babies starved by Roman tribute. This wasn't a siege. It was an execution. When it was over, Camulodunum wasn't just destroyed. It was erased. Rome heard the news. And for the first time in decades, it trembled. Rome did not fear her. Not yet. News arrived in Londinium. Camulodunum has fallen. But the governors didn't panic. They held banquets. They drank wine. They mocked her name across golden tables. A woman? Leading farmers. Let her burn the countryside, she wouldn't last a day against real soldiers. But there were no real soldiers in Londinium. The legions were stretched thin, scattered across distant campaigns. And still, they laughed. They told stories of past rebellions. They always scream, burn one village, then die in the forest. They forgot how she watched them. They forgot what she lost. They forgot that revenge does not sleep. But some Roman citizens did worry. Merchants packed their goods. Families prepared to flee. The streets whispered rumors. She's coming. The governor sent a request for reinforcements. But Rome moved slowly, chained by pride and bureaucracy. One senator wrote back, "Barbarian women don't start wars. They end them with tears." But Boudica wasn't crying. She was sharpening iron. Rome believed it ruled by right, that its walls were destiny. But destiny was marching toward them, painted in woad, wrapped in wolfskins, with a spear in her hand and a grave in her heart. She didn't want tribute. She didn't want a throne. She wanted ashes. And Rome had just laughed its way to the edge of a blade. Londinium, the Roman capital of Britain. Young, wealthy, and unguarded. A city of traders, magistrates, and freshly built arrogance. They heard of Camulodunum. They heard of Boudica. But they told themselves, this city is different. The river Thames glistened. The forums bustled. Roman citizens strolled the colonnades, pretending war wasn't racing toward them. Until it was. Boudica didn't hide her coming. Her warriors lit torches visible for miles. Horns blared through the night. Songs of rage filled the woods. And still, the governor fled. Took his guard and left the people behind. What remained were merchants, artisans, foreigners. No legions, no protection. On the morning she arrived, the streets fell silent. Then came the screams. Boudica's warriors poured in like a flood. They didn't loot. They purged. Homes were set ablaze with families still inside. Statues of Roman emperors were toppled and trampled. The governor's palace was torn apart stone by stone. The temple to the Roman gods collapsed in fire. And in its ruins, her daughters stood. watching the city that had mocked their pain finally burn. There was no mercy. Some say women were nailed through the chest to doorways. Others say children were drowned in the river. But no one lived to write it down. Londinium was silenced. Its ashes scattered to the wind. And Boudica? She didn't celebrate. She walked through the ruins like a shadow, eyes fixed forward. This was not the end. It was just the second stroke. And she had more blood to spill. Verulamium, a Romanized town of culture and wealth. Villas with mosaic floors. Public baths. A theater echoing with Latin verse. They thought they were safe. We pay our taxes. We worship Caesar. We've done nothing wrong. But to Boudica's army, every Roman city was guilty. Verulamium had laughed when the Iceni suffered, had traded in their stolen goods, had lived soft while the tribes starved under Roman tribute. They were next. The Roman citizens begged the gods, lit incense, hid behind marble columns and tiled walls. But gods don't come when the ground itself shakes. Boudica's army descended without warning. No messengers, no demands, just fire. Some say the destruction was worse than Londinium, because this wasn't strategy, it was purification. They tore open wine cellars and doused the villas. Women ran with their babies into fields, only to be caught by blades made for reaping. Old men offered coins, jewels, Roman scrolls. But Boudica's warriors didn't want bribes. They wanted balance. The theater was the last to fall. Some say dozens were chained inside, forced to sing as the flames rose. Rome had performed its culture on these lands. Now, the tribes gave their reply. In fire. By the third night, the city was nothing but embers. The air smelled of smoke and charred parchment. Bones littered the roads. Verulamium, like Camulodunum and Londinium before it, was wiped off the map. The count? Over 70,000 dead. Rome didn't just hear of it. Rome choked on it. And still, Boudica wasn't done. The Roman Empire had never been defeated by a woman. And yet, 3 cities burned. 70,000 dead. Entire provinces lost. The reports came in like storm clouds. One messenger after another, pale, shaking, silent. The governor of Britannia, Gaius Suetonius Paulinus, was thousands of miles away, fighting in Wales. By the time he returned, there was no Camulodunum, no Londinium, no Verulamium, just smoke and silence. His legions were outnumbered. His commanders were terrified. Senators debated abandoning Britannia altogether. Let them have their swamp, one said. This island bleeds more than it pays. In Rome, whispers of Boudica reached the Senate floor. A woman, beating legions, burning cities, building an army of tens of thousands. Send more troops, the emperor ordered. But they wouldn't arrive for weeks. In the meantime, Suetonius Paulinus made a brutal decision. He would not defend the next city. He would not protect the weak. He would let Boudica come. Let her army stretch itself thin. Let her believe Rome was still retreating. And then, he would trap her. In a narrow valley, where trees closed in, where cavalry could not flank, where Roman formation could be absolute. It was a gamble. One mistake, and Rome would lose all of Britain. But Rome had learned something now. Boudica was not a rumor, not a rebellion. She was a reckoning. And empires do not beg for mercy. They sharpen their swords. The land narrowed. A valley, choked with forest on both sides. No room to flank. No room to flee. Just one road, leading to one outcome. This is where Gaius Suetonius Paulinus chose to make his stand. He didn't have the numbers, but he had precision. 10,000 disciplined legionaries, hardened, silent, steel in their bones. They dug trenches, sharpened stakes, formed the impenetrable wedge of Roman strategy, shield to shield, like a wall of death. And they waited. Then, the drums, the horns, the ground began to quake. Over 100,000 Britons appeared at the mouth of the valley. Not just warriors, families. They'd brought wagons, oxen, their children. They thought they would watch Rome fall. They had come to witness history. But the valley was a coffin. They just hadn't seen the lid close. Boudica rode out in front, hair braided with iron rings. Her daughters beside her. No helmets. No fear. She looked upon the Roman line, and she saw what they didn't. Men who had never been broken. She raised her spear, not to threaten, but to inspire. You fight not for land, she told her warriors. You fight for your mothers, your daughters, your gods. Behind her, the Britons roared. It shook the trees. And in that moment, with 100,000 voices rising, it seemed the world itself would split open. But the Romans didn't move. Not one step. Just cold eyes. Locked shields. Suetonius knew something Boudica didn't. The Britons were righteous. But Rome was relentless. The line was drawn. One way in. No way out. The valley was silent. Not the silence of peace. The silence before thunder. Boudica rode out alone. Her chariot wheels dug deep into the blood-damp soil. Behind her stood a tidal wave of fury. Fathers with axes. Mothers with daggers. Children gripping stones with trembling fists. And beside her, her daughters. No longer girls. Survivors. Witnesses. Fire in human form. Boudica raised her spear, and her voice carried through the ranks like lightning through oak. You stand here not as tribes, but as one voice, one fire, one vengeance. They whipped me, she said. They violated my blood. They called us savages. But who builds empires on the backs of slaves? The army roared. She continued. They say Rome is eternal. But today, we remind them, eternity bleeds. Look beside you. You see warriors. But you also see farmers, widows, children. We were never supposed to win. And yet we burned their cities to ash. This valley is not a trap. It is a grave, and they are already in it. Strike not for gold, not for land. Strike for every mother who was silenced, every child taken, every god mocked, every name erased. Let the eagles fall today, not from the sky, but from the spears of those they thought would never rise. She turned to her daughters, touched their faces gently. If I die here, let it be known, it was not as a queen, but as a mother who made the empire scream. The drums began. The horns shook the valley, and Boudica led them forward. The charge began like an earthquake. Tens of thousands of Britons surged into the valley. Spears raised, shields rattled, screams stretching across the sky. It wasn't just war, it was a flood of rage. Behind them, the wagons blocked the exit. Women, children, livestock, all watching. They hadn't come to fight. They came to witness Rome fall. But Rome didn't fall. Rome stood still. Suetonius gave no speech, no cry. Warriors were crushed by their own fleeing kin. Wagons blocked escape. Women screamed as horses trampled. Children ran, and found only blades. The Romans kept advancing, their swords red, their eyes cold. Step, cut, step, cut. Boudica saw it unravel. Her army, her dream, her vengeance, collapsing beneath the weight of Roman precision. She tried to regroup them. But you can't rebuild hope in the middle of a massacre. By nightfall, the screams had stopped. The valley was still. The valley was quiet now. Smoke rose from broken wagons. Bodies lay piled in blooded heaps. Warriors, women, children. The living staggered like ghosts. And the dead outnumbered them. Somewhere among the ruins of her army, Boudica stood. No armor, no crown, just blood on her hands and dust in her hair. Her daughters knelt beside her, their eyes swollen with smoke. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Rome would come now. Not to fight, but to parade. They would chain her, march her through the streets of Londinium, drag her through a Roman triumph. And her daughters? They knew what Rome did to girls they called trophies. So Boudica made a final decision. Not out of fear, but out of defiance. She crushed the berries, poured the poison. She kissed her daughters once, and drank. No soldier would take her. No crowd would cheer her humiliation. She would give Rome nothing. Not her body, not her scream, not her legacy. When they found her, she was already cold. Eyes open, staring into a sky she refused to let Rome own. And just like that, the flame that lit half a nation was gone. But some fires don't die when they burn out. Some become legend. Rome won. The legions stood triumphant in the valley. The rebellion was crushed. The cities were reclaimed. And yet, there were no grand celebrations, no monuments, no triumphal arches in her name. The Senate said nothing. The emperor never spoke of her. Boudica was erased, on purpose, because her story didn't fit Rome's mythology. A woman had burned 3 Roman cities, slaughtered tens of thousands, brought an entire province to the brink of collapse. Her name wasn't supposed to echo louder than generals. But it did. And so they buried it. The scribes were told to trim her tail. The poets were told to forget her face. But the land remembered. The rivers, the stones, the shattered temples, and the people whispered, in secret songs, in hushed prayers. They spoke her name as if it were fire, a spark too dangerous to say aloud. Because even Rome, for all its power, knew the truth. You can kill a rebellion, but not the reason it rose. Years passed. The fires went out. The cities were rebuilt. Rome paved over the ruins, carved new statues, and planted crops where bones still lay beneath the soil. But Boudica never truly left. She became something more than a rebel. She became myth. Not just in Britain, but in every land where the boot of empire pressed against a throat. Mothers told their daughters her name. Warriors carved it into wood. Poets turned her pain into prophecy. The woman who lost everything became the queen of the forgotten. She was no longer flesh and blood. She was a fire that lived behind the eyes of every oppressed soul. Rome tried to bury her under silence. But the silence only grew louder. Paintings, songs, legends, centuries later, they bloomed. In every uprising, in every scream that rose from injustice, her ghost stood tall, not as a victim, but as a monument built from ashes. And in time, they built her statue, on the banks of the Thames. The same river that once ran red with the blood of her enemies. Iron chariot, spear in hand, daughters at her side, not chained, crowned. Rome won the battle. That much is history. The legions survived. Britannia stayed under the eagle's wing. The empire held the island. For a time. But empires do not last. Rome fell. Its statues toppled. Its marble cracked. Its language faded into dust. And centuries later, Britain became the empire. Ships instead of chariots. Guns instead of gladi. And it would rule half the world. The irony bled through every colony, that the land once trampled by Rome, became Rome itself. But Boudica's name was not written among the emperors. She was not claimed by conquerors. She belonged to something older. To every people who had ever risen up against chains. To every voice that had ever shouted no at a throne. Her legacy was never about winning. It was about refusing to kneel. Rome won the battle. But Boudica became the story. They say the past is buried. That time erases the blood, the screams, the broken bodies. But not all ghosts fade. In the streets of modern London, beneath the concrete and glass, Boudica still rides. Not in form, but in fire. Every protest that shakes the palace. Every woman who raises her voice against power. Every mother who stands in the face of a system built to crush her. She is there, not as myth, not as martyr, but as memory carved into the bones of rebellion. Rome tried to make her a footnote. But history, real history, lives in the sparks they couldn't smother. Boudica was not born to conquer. She was born to defy. And that is why she still burns. In the hearts of the unheard. In the mouths of the silenced. In the pages of every empire's end. Her name is no longer a whisper. It is a war drum. And it will echo, long after the last empire falls. This was the story of Boudica, the mother who made an empire bleed. If her fire moved you, there are more like her. Stories the world buried. Truths carved in blood. Subscribe to Savage Justice, Dark Empire, where we bring the forgotten to light, one brutal story at a time. Because history didn't whisper. It screamed.